I believe that you have to find folks that want a percentage, kind of like a decent percentage of their income to come from performance.
Representing Franchise Secrets, Erik Van Horn.
Jeff Herr, welcome back to the show.
Happy to be here as always, man. 10 days away from my big 5-2 birthday, bro.
Woo! Exciting times. Big
Exciting
plans?
times, man. Another trip around the old sun, as they say. No, really no plans right now. So I'm kind of a big birthday guy too. I don't know.
I'm
We might go
sure.
down to Florida. My Bengals have a preseason game that day. Might go to that. I don't know. I'll
You
dream
should do
something up.
both.
I got 10 more. I got 10 more days to think about
Yeah, you got
this.
10 more days. You could do Florida and the Bengals all in one day.
That could be good.
Here's what I'm thinking. You and I both, I mean, we're deep into the franchisor thing. Like that's what we do at Front Street is we help franchisors. We started out as franchisees. Like being a franchisee is in our DNA. Like we didn't get started in sales. We didn't get started in all these different things within franchising that we do today. We got started as franchisees. And so I really want to talk to the franchisees out there today. One point of view is from our history as franchisees, and then as we help franchisors. When I say when we help franchisors, like it may mean we're doing it at Front Street. It may mean we are just having calls with emerging brands or established brands, and we're just helping them. So that's the context for today's show. One of the things that I love as a franchisee is when the franchisor is really focused on profitability. It's so easy for me as a franchisee to see franchisors focused on top line, whatever. It's territories sold, it's franchisees in the system, it's gross revenue, maybe even gross profit. But really, what I love as a franchisee is when the franchisor is hyper focused on me being successful with profitability. And I'd say it's not that common out there, but that is that's a big one for me. So any from you, just kind of a broad question, you know, what comes to mind for you, and maybe go back to your early days of like franchising and profitability.
Back to the olden days. Wow. Yeah. I mean, look, admittedly, so like when I was in college, I didn't take a single like finance class or accounting. I was in arts and science. I'm a philosophy major of all things, but I've always had a passion for entrepreneurship. I only had one job out of school. I've been self-employed for over 25 years. Um, so like one of the things that I always, you know, as I became like a franchisee, the first thing that I really tried to spend some time was getting caught up just on like how, you know, how to kind of like run a business, whether you're selling a product or service. But to make really like critical decisions, you kind of got to understand like the financial model. And I remember being a franchisee, and it's so easy just to kind of look at the top line, right? The revenue side. Revenue's fun, but the real fun's at the bottom of the P&L, right? And so as you kind of move, as you kind of move through your chart of accounts, you know, basically your buckets of monthly expenses, and you kind of categorize them, it's really important to kind of understand like what's the path to profitability look like, right? So like, yes, revenue, what's revenue generated from? It's more than just like servicing customers and charging a fee or whatever it is. It's really about like what are the key performance indicators? What are those KPIs that really kind of drive that top line, right? What's the industry standard? What's my franchise brand standard? Like it's going to be more than just like customers through the door, right? It's a lot of the things of like an average ticket or conversion rates or following that whole customer journey from a finance standpoint. Like, how many people do I talk to? How many people do I have to talk to get them in the door? How many people have to come to the door to get the average ticket? How can I increase my average ticket? So like, I really kind of like the first part of being a franchisee was really diving into like, what are the levers that I can pull and how do I educate myself on what really moves the business so I can drive the top line. And quite frankly, like that was kind of, I mean, I was in my mid 20s when I got started as a franchisee. So like just trying to get my arms around that, there was a learning curve, right? And the franchisor that I was with really didn't have a lot of financial tools. They talked more about like how to provide good customer service and how to get those customers to come back. And hey, this is how you use the software to complete this task. But they didn't really kind of set up like a toolbox of whether it's worksheets or software or something to really kind of help measure our performance and how to drive that top line performance. Most franchisors, if they can even get to that point, that's kind of where they end. But like as a franchisee, it's really going to be about like, okay, now that I understand how to push that top line, then what I want to do is really kind of focus on the meat and potatoes of profitability, which is the middle part. It's the expenses, the operating expenses of the business. And some of them, are pretty easy to match. I mean, look, if you have a royalty or you have a brand fund, which most companies do, then that's just a simple percentage off the top line. Pretty easy. If I have a brick and mortar, I have rent, I have occupancy costs, uh, gas and electric, Wi-Fi, uh, cable, insurance, everything that goes with my boss. If I have a sprinter based business, I might probably leasing the vehicle. I've got insurance on that vehicle. I got gas in the vehicle, right? And so really kind of just truly understanding like all of the various pieces and then like what can I impact? What can I impact as a franchisee on my P&L? Can't really impact the royalty or the brand fund or things that are attached to the revenue side. And there should be pretty consistent like cost of goods across the franchise system, right? If I'm selling a product or service, there's going to be some level of cost of goods against that product and service. And maybe there's some things maybe there's products or services that I sell to my customers that have higher margins, right? If I provide a service, and then in addition to that service, I sell products after the service. I mean, that's pretty normal with brick and mortar stuff. Some of the things that you're going to sell, those products are going to have higher margin. Some are going to have lower margin. So like coaching my team, my employees around truly understanding the cost of goods of every item, both from a service perspective and a product perspective, and trying to lean in on upgrading that service with products that have higher margins. Like that's something that I can control. One thing that I know burns up a P&L more than anything is on the staffing side, right?
Pause there
Like,
on the staffing side, because I want to spend some
yeah,
time on the staffing side, because I remember early on too, especially for us, Jeff. I mean, we learned in the tax business, and in that business, there's not a lot of room for error. In other
mhm,
words, it's a seasonal business. Anytime there's a seasonal business, you have to get it right. And I don't think
that's
there's really
right.
anything that's more seasonable than the tax business. You might want to say the lawn business or the pool business or whatever it is, but that's not nearly as seasonable as a tax business. The reason is because in the tax business, once January rolled around and people could start filing taxes, that there's in the first month was like, I can't remember how much it was,
It's
but just call it,
80% of your revenue.
I'm gonna say 80% of that revenue in a month.
Yeah.
So there's
Yeah.
seasonality within the seasonality of the tax business. So you had to get it right. And I think that's why some of these
Hmm.
franchisees that come from the tax business, Like if you were able to make it in the tax business, you can make it in pretty much any other business out there because you had to listen. You were so scared to deviate from the process to do your own thing. You just listened because of that
Mm-hmm.
seasonality. You were taught, like, if you mess up the first week of the tax business, you've lost, 20% of your business. And it's hard. You can't make that up. Well, wait
Got to
another
wait another
year.
year.
So
Got to
that's
wait another
so
year.
when we talk about this kind of stuff, it's because both Jeff and I learned it in the tax business, and it was very much numbers driven. And then labor is a huge piece of that. Staffing was really the make or break profitability in that business. But before we get to that, I remember having Robert Kiyosaki on, Rich Dad Poor Dad, on the podcast, which very difficult to get on. I had to twist some arms. I didn't have to pay anybody, but I had to twist some arms to get him on. He dropped more F bombs than I've ever had on the podcast combined by far. I didn't edit it out because otherwise the podcast would have been like half the amount of time. But Kiyosaki wrote that book. It's people think, oh, it's an entrepreneurial book. That's why I'm in business. I mean, Jeff, that's one of the big reasons I'm in business today, because I read that book. But he was teaching people an income statement, a balance sheet. That's what that book is
Yes.
about. And so go back to the basics. I mean, if
Yes.
you're in business today and in franchising or entrepreneurship, you need to go back to the basics and start to understand the financial model, like Jeff said. It's one of the reasons I've got a guest coming up in the mastermind session. He's already a mastermind member, but he's like, Eric, I sold and got rid of like half of my locations. So he's down to 9 locations with, I think, 2 different brands. But he started to make decisions based on the financials. And he's like, if I get rid of this,
Mm-hmm.
I divest this, I sell that, now I can make more money, have work less hours, and be and have a really good life versus have this vanity metric of having 20 something locations across X amount
Mm-hmm.
of brands. So that's what we're talking about here. I think franchisors, think about this and help your franchisees start to understand what Jeff and I are talking about. There's books out there, there's courses out there, there's a lot that you can do. You might want to start with Mike Michalowicz. He's got a book called Profit First. It's kind of a cash
Mm.
management. It's like paying yourself first, but you start to run the business of what's left over. Mike's been on the podcast. He's got some really good books, but I would start looking at how to run your business by the numbers and really make decisions based off of the numbers, not off of emotion, like a lot of us entrepreneurs like to do. It reminds me of some conversations that I've had internally with my operating partners on a brand that I'm a franchisee with. We had an opportunity to just take over a couple locations. They were at or
Mm-hmm.
near profitability, but we ran that out. We looked at the trends. I just looked at the numbers. One of my partners was fully invested emotionally. He wanted to go in because he saw the deal that it was. And is it a deal? If you look at it from, I don't have to pay any money and they've already invested this money, so I get it for free. Yes, it's a deal. My other partner was like, I don't want to have anything to do with this because he's struggling in another business of his. So he was
Mm-hmm.
emotionally the other way. I don't want it because I'm struggling. I don't want to have to write a check to be able to keep funding it. Or me, I'm like, okay, let's not look at this emotionally. Let's look at the numbers and let's make decisions based off of the numbers. Ultimately, we said no, Jeff, because the numbers
Mm.
did not make sense, even though emotionally 2 people had 2 different ideas of what it was. But the point of that is make decisions off of the numbers, not of emotion. Let's go
That's
back
right.
to staffing because that's a very difficult thing in a business. And that's why I like businesses with fewer employees in general.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing worse than the tax business. Nothing worse than the tax business in terms of staffing, because you have the seasonality, it goes up and then it goes down. The challenge in that business is telling people you're not on the schedule. Everyone, you
Mm-hmm.
had to ramp them up, you had to get them working, and you were just slammed. That's easy. Keeping the
Mm-hmm.
desk full when customers are coming in. When the business stops coming in and you have people that need the money. They want the money. They want to keep working. And you're thinking, oh, business might still come in. You have to be able to manage that schedule and tell people, no, they're not on the schedule. So what have you learned over the years about staffing? What should franchisees and franchisors be aware of?
I mean, in most cases, like your the cost of your human resources, the cost of your staff is probably going to be the biggest line item on your P&L. I mean, more than likely it could be, 30, 40, 50% of the costs associated with operating the business. Sometimes a category might be bigger than staffing, but usually staffing is going to be your biggest line item. And it's the one. So, thus, I mean, it kind of makes sense that that's the one that you have to be a master of, right? Because that is the difference between 30% payroll and 40% payroll, because maybe you're overstaffed or maybe you hired the wrong people and you need two people to do a one-person job. So you're kind of double paying. That is the biggest piece that can influence your profitability, is how you manage that staffing piece. Look, some brands require owner operators. Some brands do not. It doesn't really matter if you have a manager built model or an owner operated model. If you are the manager, yes, you should be paying yourself something without a doubt, right? Um, but at the end of the day, you have to go into it. You have to go into it and just before you even get to the finance part, you got to make the right hires. And you have to find the folks that are going to be passionate about what the brand is delivering. But then also you want to find people that are incredibly efficient. Like I was just using this case example of needing two people to do one person's job, right? Like you want to build your team around A players, and that will give you more capacity. And if that means that you have to pay more, that's okay. I am a huge believer. I don't care what the business is, and I don't care what the person does that's working for me or working for a franchisee. I believe that you have to find folks that want a percentage, kind of like a decent percentage of their income to come from performance. Because at the end of the day, I'm in business to perform. I'm in business to deliver goods and services to the community, improve the community, make my customers and my employees happy. But at the end of the day, like I want to be able to scale my business. And in order to do that, I have to drive net operating income in order to do that. Right. Now, sometimes what you have to do is you have to continue to make more and more investments to get to a level of scale where you can get some market share in the marketplace. I always tell people, like, you can't build a brand in your market of anything with one truck, one location. You're going to start to see efficiencies in your P&L and L and in your business if you get second, third, fourth location and or trucks or whatever the measurement is of market penetration. I see a lot of times franchisees, like, they're like, "Oh, I have to get to this much before I can think about expanding the business." Well, the challenge is that you're probably in a competitive market, and maybe the businesses that you're competing against, they're like, I'm just going to continue to invest so I can gobble up market share because I know efficiencies will come that way. So look, I always want to hire people where upwards of 30%, maybe even more of their income potential is driven by performance. Now, um, performance could be cross-selling additional products and services to raise the average ticket. That's a marker of performance. Maybe even a better performance marker is how many five-star reviews do they get, right? Maybe a combination of both. So, look, because how many five-star reviews you get is going to play into all the algorithms with like Google and local search. I mean, it's just a fact. Businesses that have 2,000 5-star reviews versus 20 are just always going to organically show up higher with Google, right? So there's lots of ways to create performance-based pay. But if I'm in an interview with somebody and I say, hey, look, this is our compensation package. You have an opportunity to really make some serious money here, but it's going to come because you outperform. And if I'm in that interview and they're like, well, I don't know about that. I'd rather have a higher base. I'm going to second guess that person. I want to build my team around performance. And what's going to happen there is you're going to drive that revenue higher. So your percentage of payroll against your revenue is going to shrink just by driving higher revenue because I got the right team on the bus. What I do see though, and that you see this in the restaurant business, you see this in service businesses, is like how you manage your schedule. If you are if you're in the home service business and your people are driving around vans or trucks or sprinters or whatever, like I need to make my routes as efficient as possible, right? Um, do I need a 3-person crew versus a 2-person crew? Could I get it down to a 1.5-person crew? But like overstaffing, there's a difference between overpaying and overstaffing. Overstaffing is that what you're seeing there is you're not running an efficient model. You're overstaffed when you shouldn't be, and you're understaffed when you shouldn't be. And it's a moving target. But that's what I would spend a lot of time with my franchise business coach, or if that doesn't exist in the system, whoever's on the leadership team that helps drive efficiencies for my P&L on the operational side. That's who I want to spend my time with. I want to optimize my staff, and I want to optimize the hours that they're working on the business to have as little spillage as possible, not being overstaffed and not being understaffed when I could take advantage of opportunities. And if you do that the right way, you're talking about a 10-point swing either way. And when it's 10 points in your way versus 10 points in the opposite way, that's literally a 20-point difference
So
from end to end on that spectrum.
it's the right people and the right schedule. I remember early on, I've been a franchisee with 6, 7 different brands. Early on, we didn't have any tools on staffing. And then the tools were introduced and they got better and better and better. We had some of the KPIs, like this is what, payroll should be X amount of revenue, X amount of tax returns, whatever those KPIs were, we had them. And then I got into other brands over the years as a franchisee. They didn't have the sophisticated tools that we had at Liberty at that point. So I think I just want to be clear to franchisees out there. If you have an amazing scheduling tool, you're doing great with that brand. That brand's really helping you out. If you have KPIs, that brand is really helping you out as well. So I don't want people to have this expectation that every franchisor has these amazing tools that are for scheduling. I think franchisors that are talking about scheduling, understaffing, overstaffing, the right schedule, the right people, and they're helping you with that, like that's a win. And then you were talking about like going from one location and being profitable and whatnot. It made me think about Sola Salon. So I was a franchisee with Sola Salons. I was going to do one by my 3 by myself. And then I'm like, no, we want to do 12 and I'll bring in business partners. And I knew as soon as I made that decision to grow fast, to do more than I really could by myself, that meant going in blind in some ways. So we signed the first lease in Mission Viejo at the Kaleidoscope Center. And we signed that one before we were even in a build out in that one. We signed another one in Huntington Beach. And then before we were even done building out, so knew anything about profitability on Mission Viejo, much less Huntington Beach, we had signed Culver Plaza in Irvine. And so we had this, here's what we had. We had construction being about done in Mission Viejo. We thought that was going to be a solid one. We thought Huntington Beach was going to be on fire. We thought that thing was just going to print money. And then we had Irvine that was signed and we were committed to. So we had $3 million committed before we had one that could really validate what we were doing. And we were okay with that because that's what we signed up for. We wanted to secure a market, and in securing a market, that's exactly what we signed up for. So so here's how it actually played out. Mission Viejo opened up average. We opened up, I think it was, call it break even. That was good. You know, we were not having to put money into the business. I think 3 months into it, we were good. We were excited. Opened up Huntington Beach, franchisor, real estate people. Everybody's like, this thing's just going to be a rocket ship. It was a dog. It was a dog. and for a number of different reasons, but like we had to lower our prices. No, let me restate that. We chose to lower our prices to get money coming in so we didn't have to keep writing large checks every month. What that actually did was decrease the path of profitability because we lowered our prices to make a little bit of money faster. And it was just a long climb out of it as we reflected 2 years later. So average location opened up average. Second location that was supposed to be the big winner opened up a dog. And then the third location filled up and was profitable and at max capacity before we even opened. And Jeff, we couldn't do anything to stop that thing from making money. It just printed money month after month after month.
That's awesome.
Same franchisee group, same manager, same everything, 3 different locations. And I look back, if I had opened up Huntington Beach, number one, and I waited for that one to prove itself out
would have never got to a level of scale.
We would have never opened up 12. So since we did 3 same franchisees in a similar market, we were in, and we saw what we did at Culver. We tweaked some of the things that we're doing in real estate. We hired our district operational manager, which when you're thinking about profitability, like we hired somebody 6 figures that reduced our profit. Like we could have continued to kind of do things internally as franchisees. But we're like, no, we don't want to do that. We want to work on the business, not in the business. So let's make a 6-figure hire to be able to manage this thing for us. Less net operating income. I mean, less cash flow because of that. But as a result, 3 locations, we looked at the picture globally and we saw the path forward. And then we did 12, and then we exited to private equity within 5 years. But awesome. That's the true story. So I'm so glad that worked out the way that it did. But talk about to the audience here when we think about profitability, because I think this is important in validation. A lot of franchisees are validating with buyers out there, and they are talking about apples and bowling balls, apples and oranges, and they're saying, I'm not profitable or I am profitable. And they could be talking about completely different things. So talk to the franchisees, talk to the buyers out there on maybe ROI, net income, operating income, EBITDA, cash flow, all of that kind of stuff.
All the buzzwords.
Yeah.
Attention, franchisors and franchisees. There are 2 really important resources that I want to share with you that will help you avoid costly mistakes and increase your enterprise value. The first is our free Facebook group. It's a community that has over 4,000 franchisees and franchisors in it. When somebody asks a question, they get honest and authentic answers from multiple perspectives. You can join the group for free over at franchisesecrets.com/Facebook. The second resource I want to share with you is if you're a franchisee and you want to be around a community of successful Zs and other brands and in other industries, this is why I created the Franchisee Mastermind. If you want access to the best single and multi-unit owners to know what they're doing, or if you want to be around other multi-brand owners, then you'll want to check out my Franchisee Mastermind. The reason why people join is they want access to my Rolodex, my connections, to each other. They want a shortcut success, both short-term and long-term. Links will be in the show notes or at scalablefranchise.com.
I was franchisor. I was a franchisor over 10 years ago with a brand. And one of the first locations that opened up, like, I was like, wow, this thing's really doing well. This thing's really cranking it out. And I was looking at all the data and it was like, this is crushing it. I remember reaching out to the franchisee. I was like, man, these guys are crushing it. He's like, I'm bleeding money. I'm like, what? I'm like, there's no possible way. And so I'm like, send over your P&Ls. Let's go through it line by line. There has to be something that's hanging up because what I'm seeing on my end and like the revenue you're generating and the customer, your customer count is up week over week, month over month. I'm like, so he sends it over. And he was paying his wife who didn't work in the business $15,000 a month. That was the reason he thought he was losing money. Look, you can
15
pay
grand a month.
you $15,000 a month, and she wasn't even working in the business. Look, I'm not an accountant, okay? And you can do whatever you want with your, talk to your professionals, your accountants, and your lawyers, and if you want to run every single human thing through the business I'm just, once again, I'm not telling you to do it or not do it. What I'm telling you is if you're if you're running personal expenses through the business, right, or you're paying somebody that's not working in the business, is that a true operating cost of the business? And the answer is no. It's just not. So, like, first things first is we always talk about like a chart of accounts. Okay? This is a term that I didn't make up. This is a term that's out there, and you have to be able to look at a chart of accounts. What what expenses do I have that every other franchisee has? Then there's some decisions that I'm going to make. What, like, maybe I pay somebody that doesn't do anything, but that's not apples to apples, right? So, like, look, first things first, you start out with your gross revenue, right? And usually, as you kind of move from top to bottom on a P&L, the next thing that you're going to look at is your cost of goods. Some people put labor in there, some people don't. It doesn't matter. Whatever the definition of cost of goods is, needs to be the same across every single franchisee. Labor's in, fine. Labor's in for everybody. It's always got to be apples to apples, right? So you have your cost of goods for the products and services that you're selling. And that needs to be the same exact formula for every single franchisee in the system. Okay. Then you take your revenue and you minus the cost of goods. And then the next flashy word is you have gross profit. Gross profit. From there, you're going to run your true operating expenses that you and every other franchisee in the system has. Just those. Now, look, you may run some expenses through the business, but what I would suggest is if they're not truly operating expenses that every single franchisee has to run the business, then you're going to put it below the line. And I'm going to talk about that here in a second. So then I'm going to run through my operating expenses. If it's brick and mortar, I have my rent, right? I have my gas and electric bill. I got all my occupancy costs. Then if it's home service, maybe it's the cost of operating the trucks or cost of operating the equipment. Cost of operating the equipment is probably up in the old COGS line there. But I'm going to run through and put down the expenses that I have that every single other franchisee has. If I have an expense that other franchisees don't have, I'm not going to put it in my operating expenses. I'm still going to put it in, but I'm going to show you where you're going to put it in here in a little bit.
Hey, Jeff,
So then,
speaking of a little bit, don't lose that thought. Talking about what you are right now reminded me of a conversation I had with a franchisee a few years ago at something they looked at in their data that they saw competition moving in forms of new franchisors coming into the market, and they were scared. They dug into their data of their current customer base, and then they started to laugh because they realized this new brand and multiple brands were going to absolutely tank because they didn't understand this one thing in the data. So that, I want to get to that next, but I want you to keep going on
Yep.
your train of thought.
So you have the cost of the trucks or the cost of occupancy for brick and mortar. Then you have that whole staffing piece that I mentioned, right? And you want to look at like, okay, what are my fixed costs with staffing, right? Whether that's hourly wages or a fixed wage, 3, 4, 5 grand a month, whatever it is. But then also break out like, okay, my next piece is going to be like that performance compensation, bonuses, commissions, whatever you want to call it. Then you have your payroll related expenses like processing the payroll tax. Then you got your, any benefits that you're supplying to your employees as well, right? So you want pretty granular. And once again, it needs to be apples to apples. In other words, if I'm a franchisee and I'm paying as a benefit, I'm paying like disability insurance for my employees. If every franchisee isn't doing that, then I wouldn't put that as a true operating cost of the business because it's a choice that I made. Once again, it doesn't disappear from the P&L. I just move it to a different spot because what I really want to isolate here is what is the net operating income of my business. Net operating income and net income are two different things, but I need to understand every single line. I only put in what every single other franchisee has. If I make any discretionary choices on how to pay this or pay that, or I am buying software outside of what's necessary that the franchisor delivers, but nobody else is doing, I'm just going to move that around into a different category. Okay. Because I want to just, once again, it has to be what do we all have together so that we can really isolate net operating income, right? So you got your staffing piece, then you got your marketing piece. And once again, get granular there. Like how much am I spending on digital, social? How much am I spending? Do I have a local marketing firm? Do I have a local SEO company or whatever that is? Get granular there. Um, then you have, your professional services, office supplies, miscellaneous. I kind of bundle up a lot of those pieces. Once again, as long as they're apples to apples with every other franchisee, I kind of bundle those up as like general operating expenses. G&A is, general and administrative costs. Like that's a pretty common term. So, and then you have your franchisor related expenses, your royalty, your brand fund. You may have a technology fee. You may have, other certain things that are fixed or percentage based that every other franchisee has. And so I take my revenue minus my cost of goods, I get to my gross profit. I then take out the operating expenses of the business, whether that's occupancy costs or truck costs. Then I'm going to take out my payroll. Then I'm going to take out my marketing. Then I'm going to take out my franchisor related expenses. And then I'm going to take out my general operating expenses. And then I get to my true net operating income of the business. Then below that line, if I have one-time costs, maybe I bought a piece of equipment. Okay. And I'm financing that piece of equipment, and not every franchisee has that piece of equipment. Then I'm going to put the interest that I pay on that loan, or if I have an SBA loan, or if I have an equipment loan, or whatever I have, the interest that I have is going to go below the net operating income piece, right? And then there's some other things that are also going to go there. Like once again, if I'm if I'm running any personal expenses through the business, I'm going to put that below that because it's not truly an operating cost of the business. So then I take my net operating income, I deduct my interest on any loans that I have, any one-time purchases, other. I don't. We don't need to get into like depreciation and amortization, all that stuff. Um, but at the end of the day, then I get down to like net income, right? Pre-tax net income. So everything needs to go into my P&L no matter what I'm paying. But I think with where mistakes are made and when people are not talking apples to apples, it's you really need to isolate what is the net true operating income of my business. Then I look at things like interest I'm paying on loans and other pieces below that line. And then I can look at net income as well. But at the end of the day, is the operating business profitable before those other pieces? And that's where I think it gets a little fuzzy. And that needs to be driven by each franchisee. Mm. And look, I think I had a conversation with you yesterday. Like my wife's has a business, and I literally with one of her employees yesterday. Um, I literally went line by line through the P&L so that she's the operations manager of the business. So she should totally understand what's moving profitability in my wife's business. And it was awesome. And she loved it. She wants my wife to be more profitable because I think she thinks she'll probably partake in some of that profit. Um, but it was a great exercise and it was very eye-opening and she really appreciated it. Your employees are going to love knowing what's moving the business and they want you to be profitable because that creates opportunity for them.
Jeff, I
All
want
right.
to hear this one thing, and I need a one-liner from you, and I'll get this wrapped up within 60 seconds.
Okay.
Large franchisee started to get concerned because there is a kind of a newer take on his current industry coming in. A lot of franchisees were being sold all across the country. He started diving into the data, realized his customer churn came from the younger demographic. All the churn came from the younger demographic. The older demographic did not have the churn. They were the most profitable part of his business. New Zors came in, new franchisees thought they were going to make many, many millions. They ended up being a huge fat failure. And so he knew, and he told me this was going to happen. So now all these franchisees are struggling, same industry, different demographics. He knew his numbers and he did that, not just based off of competition, but because he knew who he wanted to market to. Any quick comments, thoughts on knowing your numbers on something like that?
Yeah, I was on a town hall call with one of our brands today and they brought in a franchisee to kind of talk about some things and she said something on the call that I was like, wow, that is pretty awesome. The suggestion that she made to other folks in the franchise community was don't be afraid to ask for help. She called it raising your hand. I was like, holy cow, like I love that. She's like, don't be afraid to raise your hand. If you don't understand finance, you have to incorporate educating yourself on finance, whether it's a podcast or YouTube or a book on tape, or a trusted advisor you want to go to. But you have to understand, like, what does COGS mean? What does gross profit mean? What does net operating income mean? Like, then we didn't even talk about a balance sheet. But like, do you even know what a balance sheet is? Like you've got to educate yourself. And look, what I would suggest is, and what she kind of nailed it on the call, just raise your hand.
Yep.
Put your hand up, which means reach out and say, hey, I want to work on my path to profitability. I want to decrease my staffing costs. I want to increase my revenue. I want to be educated on what are the key drivers that move my P&L, both on the revenue and expense side. Be a student of the game. I mean, you got to constantly sharpen that axe. So it's okay if a lot of what we talked about today is completely going over your head, but make a change immediately. Raise your hand, reach out to other mentors, other franchisees that are doing well, ask the franchisor, go to YouTube, do the books on tape, sharpen the axe, truly understand what moves the needle in your business when it comes to finance. That's all I got.
Thanks for listening to the Franchise Secrets podcast. Links to everything can be found over at franchisesecrets.com. And if you want my help with anything from starting your own franchise to growing your current franchise business, please visit scalablefranchise.com.